Welcome, dear listener, to a journey back in time, to an era where crowns often concealed tumultuous lives and royal chambers whispered tales of power, politics, and unconventional personal relationships. Tonight, we delve into the fascinating world of medieval queens, women who, despite the constraints of their time, navigated complex landscapes with remarkable audacity and at times scandalous flair. As the soft glow of your lamp illuminates the quiet corners of your room, allow your mind to drift to a time when queens were not merely figures on a chessboard, but active players, shaping destinies and defying expectations. Their stories, often overshadowed by their male counterparts, reveal a hidden tapestry of strength, cunning, and an unwavering will to survive and thrive. Our first stop brings us to the vibrant, sun-drenched kingdom of Naples, where in 1343 Joanna ascended to the throne. From the outset, Joanna seemed to view royal protocol less as a rigid set of rules and more as a flexible guideline. Where others saw tradition, she saw opportunity. Where others envisioned a single, lifelong partner, Joanna embraced a more expansive view of matrimony. She married 4 times, a practice not entirely unheard of in medieval noble circles. Yet Joanna possessed a peculiar knack for outliving her husbands, sometimes with a swiftness that raised eyebrows and fueled whispers. Her first husband, Andrew of Hungary, met an untimely end within a year of their marriage, found hanging from a window in what was officially declared an unfortunate accident. Unofficially, questions lingered, but Joanna, it seemed, had none. It is a particular legend, however, that truly cemented Joanna's infamous reputation. The tale speaks of a trapdoor cunningly concealed beneath her bed, a rather imaginative solution for concluding an evening when mere words proved insufficient. After a night of royal intimacy, the floor would, so the story goes, allegedly open beneath her partner, sending him plummeting into the castle moat. Efficient, undeniably dramatic, and quite possibly a fabrication spun by a particularly disgruntled former suitor, the story nonetheless endured. Perhaps it resonated with the popular perception of Joanna's character, fitting perfectly with her audacious spirit. Joanna ruled Naples with an undeniable elegance and a theatrical flourish. She was not reckless, but rather selective, choosing her battles and her alliances with shrewd precision. Some lauded her charm, others condemned her as dangerous, and a brave few, perhaps wisely, offered both assessments while slowly retreating from her presence. She steadfastly maintained her position through wars, papal indignation, political rivalries, and a string of bedroom scandals. Through it all, she wore her crown with the same bold, unapologetic confidence with which she carried her reputation. By the time of her death, possibly by strangulation at the hands of one of her many enemies or even allies, the details remain shrouded in the mists of history. Joanna had bequeathed a legacy of drama, power, and enough captivating gossip to sustain Italian ballads for centuries. Joanna of Naples was more than just a queen. She was a living headline long before the concept of headlines even existed. Next, we journey to the 12th century to meet a woman who didn't merely exist within her era, but in many ways defined it, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Queen of France, then Queen of England, and at one point the formidable mother of 2 future kings, Eleanor didn't so much play the Game of Thrones as she flipped the board, savored the wine, and then composed a sonnet about the entire affair. Her first marriage at the tender age of 15 was to Louis VII of France. He was a man of deep piety, often painfully awkward, and exuded the distinct aura of someone who married his cousin primarily because he lacked other engaging hobbies. Eleanor, in stark contrast, was witty, immensely wealthy, and possessed an attention span as restless and keen as a falcon in pursuit of its prey. Their union, predictably, functioned about as well as one might expect. Louis, in a rather misguided attempt at a romantic getaway, dragged her on the Second Crusade to the Holy Land, an adventure perhaps appealing only to those who relish marching through scorching deserts in full armor while their spouse weeps over ancient relics. Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, brought with her fine clothes a retinue of musicians and perhaps a burgeoning fondness for her strikingly handsome uncle, the Prince of Antioch. Rumors, as they often do in royal courts, began to swirl. Louis, for his part, simply frowned a great deal. The marriage, devoid of warmth and affection, quietly dissolved over a cold supper in Damascus. Following the annulment, Eleanor, with a newfound sense of liberation, practically sprinted back to Aquitaine, where she swiftly remarried. Her chosen partner this time was Henry Plantagenet, the future King of England. He was 11 years her junior, possessed fiery red hair, and was known for his wildly unpredictable nature, in short, precisely her type. Their marriage, a tempestuous union, produced 10 children, ignited multiple wars, and fostered one of the most enduringly passive-aggressive households in European history. Yet, Eleanor was far more than a royal broodmare. At her court in Poitiers, she became a fervent champion of courtly love, a revolutionary new genre that encouraged noble ladies to be admired from a respectful distance by hopelessly smitten knights, often characterized by their emotional vulnerabilities and impeccably chiseled cheekbones. Of course, from afar, part of this romantic ideal was often conveniently overlooked. Instead, it was an era of stolen glances, lute-playing serenades, and long, meandering walks that more often than not concluded discreetly behind tapestries. Eleanor's court swiftly became the premier destination for nobles whose passions outweighed their impulse control. When Henry's wandering eye, tired of the confines of monogamy and perhaps of Eleanor herself, began to stray, she responded in a manner befitting any self-respecting royal mother by actively assisting her sons in staging a full-blown rebellion against their father. Henry, understandably, was not amused. Eleanor found herself placed under castle arrest for a remarkable 16 years. For Eleanor, however, this was not a punishment, but rather an extended opportunity to compose letters, sip fine wine, and meticulously plot her vengeance through the strategic manipulation of her children. She entered her marriage as a queen, and she emerged from her confinement as a legend, a testament to her indomitable spirit and her profound influence on the course of medieval history. Our narrative now shifts to Margaret of Burgundy, a queen who on paper seemed destined for a life of impeccable royal decorum. She possessed all the requisite attributes: a pristine royal bloodline, a proper marriage to the heir of France, an undeniable elegance in fur-trimmed gowns, and crucially, no overt inclination to poison anyone at court dinners. She was, by all accounts, a model medieval wife. Yet, the year 1314 would forever alter this perception, as France discovered that housing 3 princesses, bored and unsupervised within the confines of a castle, was a potent recipe for gossip, intricate embroidery, and, rather unexpectedly, extramarital dalliances. Margaret was married to Louis, the future King Louis X, a man whose charisma was frequently, and perhaps accurately, compared to that of boiled cabbage. Their union was, to put it mildly, less than thrilling, and Margaret, it seems, grew weary of reading psalms and pretending that Louis' bedtime stories about tax reform possessed any semblance of seductive charm. This ennui led to the infamous Tour de Nesle affair, a scandal so dramatically named it sounds as though it were plucked directly from a medieval soap opera. According to the accounts, Margaret and her sister-in-law Blanche began to clandestinely meet 2 handsome Norman knights. Their chosen rendezvous? The Tour de Nesle, a royal tower conveniently situated by the Seine, private, mildly rumored to be haunted, and crucially, apparently soundproof enough for both courtly whispers and decidedly less courtly behavior. The knights were eventually apprehended, and in a twist that seems almost too absurd for fiction, they were identified by the distinctive pattern on their pillowcases. Royal servants with an eagle eye for luxury linens noticed that the knights possessed bedding identical to that found in the princess's chambers. Indeed, the downfall of a queen was precipitated not by espionage or poison, but by a rather unfortunate choice in laundry. King Philip IV, Margaret's father-in-law and the reigning monarch, was, to say the least, not amused. The knights were subjected to torture and publicly executed with a dramatic flair befitting the gravity of their transgression. As for Margaret, she was summarily imprisoned at Chateau Gaillard, a fortress whose name, in its cheerful brevity, belied its grim reality. She died there 2 years later, her demise attributed variously to illness, suffocation, or the rather convenient desire of her husband to secure a clean slate before ascending to the throne. Medieval history, ever elusive in its precise details, remains suspiciously silent on the matter of whether the incriminating pillowcases were ever returned. Margaret's true crime was not politics, witchcraft, or treason. It was rather the audacious act of being a little too charming in the wrong tower with the wrong men, and most damningly, on the wrong linens. In medieval France, such an indiscretion was more than sufficient to ensure one's erasure from the annals of respectable history. Our journey continues with Isabella of France, a medieval queen who seemingly possessed every conceivable advantage: royal blood, a glittering crown, and an enviable collection of expensive French shoes. What she lacked, however, was a husband she could tolerate. In 1308, she married Edward II of England, a man who, while tall and handsome, appeared to possess a far greater emotional availability for his male favorites than for his wife, a complication, to say the least, in a royal marriage. From the very outset, Isabella faced formidable competition. Edward was already deeply enamored with Piers Gaveston, a charming knight renowned for his sartorial flair and the political tact of a fruit bat. Edward showered Gaveston with titles, lands, and the kind of undivided attention that most wives spent years striving to attain. At the coronation banquet, Gaveston, with audacious disregard for protocol, wore more jewels than Isabella herself. She noticed. Gaveston was eventually exiled, then recalled, exiled once more, and finally unceremoniously beheaded by a cadre of annoyed nobles who found his eyeliner and smugness deeply unimpressive. Isabella may have shed a royal tear, or perhaps not. But just when one might have thought the marital drama had reached its zenith, Edward replaced Gaveston with Hugh Despenser, a man so rapacious and universally unpopular that he made Gaveston appear, by comparison, almost palatable. Despenser was not merely a fixture in the king's bedchamber. He held sway over the treasury, the council, and haunted the nightmares of every single noble in the realm. He exiled Isabella's allies, seized her lands, and, with a breathtaking lack of foresight, publicly insulted her. A bold strategy, indeed, and historically an unwise one. By 1326, Isabella had reached the limits of her endurance. Taking her young son, the future Edward III, she fled to France under the guise of diplomatic negotiations. There she encountered Roger Mortimer, a nobleman possessing a rebellious streak, a strong jawline, and, crucially, a very available marital status. Together, Isabella and Mortimer orchestrated a full-scale invasion of England. Yes, indeed. A queen, accompanied by her lover and her teenage son, invaded her own country. And it worked. Edward was captured and summarily deposed. Then the whispers began. Edward II died in prison under circumstances shrouded in mystery. One particularly gruesome rumor suggested the involvement of a red-hot poker, an exaggeration most historians now agree, but one that nonetheless underscored the brutal nature of the times. Isabella's hands, it must be said, were not entirely clean. She ruled England as regent for several years, sharing power and, in all likelihood, blankets with Mortimer, until her son, weary of the arrangement, orchestrated their overthrow. Isabella was subsequently sent into a comfortable retirement, for even a rebellious queen, it seems, eventually requires a respite. She entered her story as a wife. She departed as a legend, forever etched into history as the she-wolf of France. Our next figure, Agnes of Navarre, was born into a world steeped in poetry, intricate politics, and the subtle machinations of passive-aggressive dynasties. As the daughter of a king and the sister of a troubadour queen, she was raised in an environment where words were sharp, alliances even sharper, and a well-placed romantic affair possessed the power to either mend almost anything or, conversely, to utterly ruin everything. She ascended to the queenship of Aragon through her marriage to King James II's grandson, James IV. This union, seemingly advantageous, quickly revealed its true nature. Her new husband was already halfway to lunacy, and not the charming, artistic kind of madness, but rather the sort that involved waking up screaming and accusing the curtains of treason. Agnes, faced with this rather unenviable situation, responded in the only way a self-respecting medieval noblewoman with limited options could, by discreetly, repeatedly, and with an apparent penchant for variety, turning her affections elsewhere. Her alleged list of lovers was extensive, encompassing knights, courtiers, musicians, and perhaps even a monk who, by all accounts, was rather terrible at upholding his vows. She was charming, cultured, and effortlessly fluent in the nuanced language of flirtation, a skill that, in the court of Aragon, proved far more useful than a mastery of Latin, and quite possibly far more dangerous. Of course, secrets, particularly in castles with thick stone walls and an abundance of bored servants, rarely remain secret for long. Rumors began to swirl, and before long Agnes's love life had become a more popular topic of discussion than the Psalms themselves. To be clear, Agnes was never officially apprehended. There was no public trial, no confession extracted under duress. Yet people did begin to die around her, quietly, conveniently. A rival here, a gossipy maid there, and one particularly unfortunate courtier who, it was reported, simply tripped into a very full moat. Was she behind these mysterious demises? We shall never truly know. However, the kitchen staff, it was said, began to lock the spice cabinets whenever she passed by, just in case. Eventually, her husband died, shockingly, not by her hand. And Agnes, in a move that spoke volumes, retired to a convent, not out of guilt, mind you, but rather in adherence to tradition. Convents for noblewomen of the era served as havens where they could read, pray, and perhaps most importantly, quietly outlive their scandals. She never remarried, possibly because no one was brave enough to ask, or perhaps because she had finally found a measure of peace among nuns who blessedly refrained from asking nosy questions. Agnes of Navarre left behind no direct heirs, but she did leave a legacy, a persistent whisper in the court, a lingering rumor in the corridors, and a cautionary tale embedded within every love poem that ended far too abruptly. Our final queen, Joanna of Castile, was a princess by birth, a queen by title, and a living, breathing cautionary tale about the perils of becoming overly emotionally attached to one's spouse. She married Philip the Handsome of Burgundy, and no, this was not merely a flattering moniker. He was, by all accounts, the medieval equivalent of a heartthrob, boasting flowing blonde hair, impressively sculpted calves, and a smirk that suggested he had never, not once, been compelled to wash a single dish. Joanna, despite her rigorous royal training, fell deeply and irrevocably in love. Theirs was a marriage of intense passion until, inevitably, it wasn't. Philip, charming and ambitious, possessed a profound allergy to monogamy. He cheated constantly, subtly at first, then with a reckless abandon usually reserved for poorly written romance novels. Joanna, not one to passively accept betrayal, responded with fits of incandescent rage, relentless interrogations, and, according to some sources, a few rather undignified attempts at hair-pulling diplomacy. But then events took a truly bizarre turn when Philip suddenly and quite unexpectedly dropped dead in 1506. The official explanation? He had allegedly succumbed to the ill effects of drinking cold water after a game of ball. Even for the 16th century, this explanation was suspiciously vague. Joanna was utterly devastated, and not merely in the conventional black veil and move on sense of devastation. Hers was the kind of grief that compelled her to exhume his body and carry it with her for months. She repeatedly ordered the coffin opened, driven by a desperate need to ensure that no one had dared to steal his remains. She kissed his lifeless lips. She even, in a testament to her possessive grief, refused to allow any other women near the corpse, fearing perhaps that even in death, Philip remained a flight risk. Joanna traversed Castile with the coffin, stopping at monasteries, insisting on sleeping beside it, and, according to some whispers, possibly even with it, the chroniclers, perhaps wisely, grew rather vague at this particular juncture. Whether motivated by respect or sheer discomfort, the people began to whisper. Courtiers panicked. Her father, Ferdinand, eventually declared her insane and, with a chilling pragmatism, confined her to a convent for the next 46 years, a record even among emotionally intense queens. Was Joanna truly mad, or merely a grief-stricken woman clinging desperately to the one man who had, in his own way, profoundly let her down? Historians continue to debate this question. Regardless, she remains one of the few medieval queens known more for her post-mortem romance than for any action she undertook during her living years. Before we conclude our exploration of scandalous queens, it is imperative to address a persistent myth. No, Catherine the Great did not die while attempting intimacy with a horse. The mere necessity of stating this, however, offers a glimpse into the sheer wildness of her reputation and the relentless efficiency of the 18th century gossip machine, particularly once she had managed to displease a sufficient number of influential individuals. While Catherine technically falls outside our strict medieval time frame, her inclusion here is justified by the sheer density of scandal that clung to her name. Born a minor German princess, she married into Russian royalty, only to quickly realize that her husband, Peter III, was less a czar and more a grown child obsessed with military toys and possessing a rather concerning fondness for Prussia. He preferred playing soldiers to governing an empire, or for that matter, spending time with his wife. Consequently, Catherine, like any ambitious woman trapped in an emotionally frigid marriage, sought solace and companionship elsewhere. She took lovers, many lovers, including officers, nobles, poets, and perhaps even a furniture maker. Some were younger, some were terrifyingly competent. One, remarkably, was 18 when she was 60, a fact that, upon reflection, seems less scandalous and more, dare we say, motivational. Yet Catherine was not reckless. She was meticulously calculating. She rewarded her lovers with estates and titles, establishing a kind of royal loyalty program, impressed the empress, and you walked away with land and perhaps a comfortable pension. Failed to impress? Well, there was always exile. Now, back to that infamous rumor. Sometime after her death, malicious enemies, or perhaps simply very bored aristocrats, propagated the tale that Catherine had met her end while attempting intimate relations with a horse. The rumor was so utterly absurd, so anatomically implausible, that it should have withered and died immediately. It did not. Why? Because Catherine was a powerful woman who dared to rule without the overt guidance of a man. She enacted sweeping reforms, crushed rebellions, and, perhaps most controversially, instructed the church to confine itself to its own affairs. Naturally, the only way people could reconcile such audacious independence was to invent a story involving livestock and architectural mishaps. In reality, she died of a stroke in her bed, fully clothed, and crucially with no livestock present. But the damage was done. The myth persisted because people, it seems, often prefer scandal to truth. And Catherine, already scandalous enough in life, became downright legendary in death. She may not have slept with a horse, but she most certainly wrote history as if she owned it, leaving an indelible mark on the world, a testament to her formidable will and her enduring, albeit often misunderstood, legacy. If you harbored the quaint notion that medieval queens spent their days serenely embroidering and sighing delicately by candlelight, allow us to introduce Fredegund of Neustria. This was a woman who held firm beliefs in marital duty, royal dignity, and, rather emphatically, in stabbing her enemies in the neck. Born a servant, Fredegund ascended through the ranks with an efficiency that typically demands either extraordinary charisma or significant body count. In her case, it was unequivocally both. She captured the attention of King Chilperic I of Neustria, a Frankish king who at the time already possessed a wife, though not for long. His first queen, mysteriously, met her demise shortly after Fredegonde's arrival on the scene. Shocking, truly. The second wife, Galswintha, was found strangled in her bed not long after marrying Chilperic. Fredegonde, by then firmly ensconced in the king's favor, repeatedly denied any involvement, her denials delivered with that classic, subtly defiant tone that seemed to imply, "I may be holding a pillow, but that proves absolutely nothing." Once married to Chilperic herself, Fredegonde's ambition did not wane. It escalated dramatically. She was famously known for keeping a knife under her pillow. Not symbolically, mind you, but literally. This was a woman who approached bedtime as if it were a potential crime scene. Political rivals were poisoned, bishops met untimely ends, and the court of Neustria became a dangerous, unpredictable arena where Fredegonde's will reigned supreme. Her story is a stark reminder that the pursuit of power in the medieval world was often a brutal, no-holds-barred affair, and that some queens, far from being passive figures, were formidable forces to be reckoned with, leaving a trail of intrigue and, quite literally, bodies in their wake. As the nights grew longer and the chill of winter settled over the medieval landscape, a different kind of warmth began to emanate from within the castles and cottages, the warmth of anticipation for the Christmas celebrations. Far from the commercialized spectacle we know today, medieval Christmas was a rich tapestry woven with threads of ancient pagan rituals, Christian solemnity, and a joyous inversion of social norms. It was a time when the boundaries between the sacred and the profane blurred, and the spirit of revelry often overshadowed pious reflection. Long before the birth of Christ was celebrated, the winter solstice held profound significance for ancient cultures across Europe. As the shortest day of the year gave way to the promise of returning light, pagan communities marked this turning point with festivals of renewal and rebirth. The Germanic peoples celebrated Yule, a multi-day feast honoring their gods and ancestors, characterized by feasting, bonfires, and the burning of the Yule log, a massive piece of wood ceremonially brought into the home and kept burning for days, symbolizing the sun's enduring light. The Romans, too, observed Saturnalia, a raucous festival dedicated to the god Saturn, where social hierarchies were temporarily overturned, masters served their slaves, and gifts were exchanged. When Christianity spread across Europe, rather than eradicating these deeply ingrained traditions, the Church often shrewdly absorbed and recontextualized them. The date of Christ's birth, not definitively known, was strategically placed in late December, coinciding with these established winter festivals. This clever assimilation allowed for a smoother transition to the new faith, blending familiar customs with Christian narratives. Thus, the medieval Christmas or Yuletide became a fascinating hybrid, where the solemnity of the Nativity intertwined with the boisterous echoes of its pagan past. For the medieval nobility, Christmas was not a single day, but an extended period of lavish celebration, often spanning from Christmas Eve through the Epiphany on January 6th. The heart of these festivities was undoubtedly the grand banquet. Imagine the scene. Long tables laden with an abundance of food, roasted meats like boar and venison, savory pies, rich stews, and sweet confections. Spices, a luxury from distant lands, would have perfumed the air, adding an exotic touch to the festive fare. Wine and ale flowed freely, warming bodies and spirits against the winter chill. Entertainment was paramount. Minstrels would play their lutes and harps, jesters would perform their antics, and acrobats might tumble for the amusement of the assembled company. Carols, both sacred and secular, would have filled the halls, their melodies echoing the joy of the season. One of the most distinctive features of medieval Christmas was the temporary inversion of social roles, often presided over by a figure known as the Lord of Misrule or Abbot of Unreason. This elected or appointed individual, often a commoner or a junior member of the household, would temporarily assume authority, overseeing the revelries and orchestrating playful chaos. Servants might be waited upon by their masters, and the usual strictures of hierarchy were loosened, allowing for a brief, exhilarating period of freedom and light-hearted rebellion. This tradition, rooted in ancient pagan practices, served as a pressure valve, allowing society to momentarily release tensions before returning to its established order. Gifts, while not as central as they are today, were exchanged, though typically on New Year's Day rather than Christmas itself. These might have been small tokens, practical items, or for the nobility, more elaborate presents reflecting their status. The emphasis, however, was less on material accumulation and more on communal feasting, shared merriment, and the collective experience of warding off the winter darkness with light, warmth, and good cheer. Despite the boisterous revelry, the religious significance of Christmas remains central. Midnight Mass, a solemn and deeply moving service, was one of the most important events of the Christmas season. Families from the highest nobility to the humblest peasants would gather in their local churches, their faces illuminated by candlelight to commemorate the birth of Christ. The air would have been thick with the scent of incense, and the chanting of hymns would have filled the cold stone naves, creating an atmosphere of profound reverence. For many, this was a moment of quiet reflection, a spiritual anchor amidst the surrounding festivities. Yet, alongside the Christian observances, older beliefs and superstitions persisted. The medieval mind often saw the world as imbued with magical forces, and Christmas, a time of transition and heightened spiritual energy, was no exception. Certain days within the Christmas period were considered particularly auspicious or unlucky for specific activities. Folk remedies and charms were often employed, and the line between genuine piety and superstitious practice was often blurred. The Christmas season was also a time for storytelling, with tales of saints, miracles, and mythical creatures being passed down through generations. These narratives, often told by the flickering light of a hearth, served not only to entertain but also to reinforce moral lessons and cultural values. Thus, medieval Christmas was a complex and multifaceted celebration, a vibrant blend of ancient traditions and evolving Christian practices, where the sacred and the profane danced together in a joyous, if sometimes chaotic, embrace. As we gently drift through the annals of medieval life, let us turn our attention to a figure of immense importance, yet often relegated to the shadows of history: the medieval midwife. In an era before modern medicine, when childbirth was a perilous journey for both mother and child, these women stood at the very threshold of life, holding a crucial, often dangerous, and deeply complex position within their communities. Their role was not merely one of assistance during labor. It encompassed a delicate balance of practical care, ancient wisdom, and a precarious standing between healing, superstition, and the watchful, often suspicious eye of the church. The medieval midwife was first and foremost a practitioner of an ancient art, her knowledge passed down through generations, often from mother to daughter or through informal apprenticeships. She was typically an older, experienced woman, often a mother herself who had witnessed countless births and understood the rhythms and challenges of the birthing process. Her tools were simple: her hands, her experience, and a deep understanding of herbal remedies and traditional practices. She would attend to the laboring woman, offering comfort, encouragement, and practical assistance. This might involve positioning the mother, applying warm compresses, or administering herbal concoctions to ease pain or stimulate contractions. She was also responsible for the immediate care of the newborn, including cutting the umbilical cord and ensuring the baby was breathing and thriving. Beyond the physical aspects of birth, the midwife often served as a spiritual guide and a source of emotional support. She would pray with the mother, offer blessings, and in cases of extreme difficulty, might even perform an emergency baptism if the child's life was in immediate danger. Her presence was a familiar and reassuring one in a time when childbirth was fraught with fear and uncertainty. Her knowledge extended beyond the moment of birth. She often provided postnatal care for the mother and infant, offering advice on breastfeeding, hygiene, and general well-being. In many communities, she was also a trusted confidant, privy to the intimate details of women's lives, offering counsel on matters of fertility, contraception, often through herbal means, and even abortion, though these practices were often shrouded in secrecy and carried significant risks. Despite their indispensable role, medieval midwives occupied a precarious position in society. Childbirth was inherently dangerous, and when outcomes were poor, as they often were, the midwife could easily become a scapegoat. She was often blamed for stillbirths, maternal deaths, or deformities, leading to accusations of incompetence, negligence, or more sinisterly, witchcraft. This vulnerability was exacerbated by the prevailing superstitions of the age. Midwives, with their intimate knowledge of the female body and their use of herbs and traditional remedies, were often viewed with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Their practices, sometimes bordering on folk magic, could easily be misinterpreted as sorcery, especially by a church increasingly concerned with stamping out perceived heresy and pagan influences. Indeed, the church's relationship with midwives was complex and often fraught with tension. While acknowledging their necessity, the ecclesiastical authorities were deeply suspicious of their autonomy and their potential to wield influence over women. Midwives were often seen as guardians of female knowledge, a realm that the patriarchal church sought to control. They were accused of performing abortions, of aiding in infanticide, and of engaging in magical rituals. This suspicion led to increasing regulation and, in some cases, persecution. Midwives were often required to be licensed by the church or by local authorities, and their practices were scrutinized. The infamous Malleus Maleficarum, a 15th century treatise on witchcraft, specifically targeted midwives, accusing them of being particularly susceptible to demonic influence and of using their skills for malevolent purposes. This fear-mongering contributed to a climate of distrust, placing midwives in a dangerous liminal space between respected healer and suspected witch. Yet, despite these challenges, midwives persisted. Their skills were too vital, their presence too comforting to be entirely suppressed. They continued to serve their communities, often at great personal risk, embodying a profound dedication to the continuation of life. Their story is a testament to the resilience of women, the enduring power of traditional knowledge, and the often overlooked contributions of those who worked tirelessly at the very heart of medieval society, bringing new life into a world both harsh and hopeful.